The film begins in stillness. No sirens, no collapsing towers, no dramatic music rising to meet disaster. Only an ocean moving in its ancient rhythm, waves folding softly against a shoreline that has changed more times than memory can measure. The camera drifts over dunes, shaped by patient wind, over forests, where leaves tremble in quiet conversation with air that has crossed continents. Everything feels permanent, balanced, undisturbed. And yet permanence is a feeling, not a fact. Human civilization tells its story as a steady ascent. From stone tools to cities of glass, from firelight to satellites. We picture the past as a narrow path leading directly to us, each generation building carefully upon the last. It is a comforting image, progress, as a straight line. Knowledge as something that only grows, but that line exists only where the record survives. History as we know it is a reconstruction. It is assembled from fragments. Stone walls that resisted erosion, tablets that escaped flame, bones preserved beneath fortunate layers of sediment. We piece together entire eras from what happened to endure. What did not endure rarely enters the narrative. Wood rots, fibre dissolves, ink fades. Spoken wisdom vanishes the moment the last voice carrying it falls silent. Coastlines retreat without apology. Rivers shift their course. Forests swallow foundations. In time, even mountains wear down to dust. We are taught that civilization began when writing appeared, when cities rose in Mesopotamia, when monuments were carved in stone. But writing survives because it was etched into clay and rock. What if earlier chapters were written on materials too fragile to remain? What if memory once flowed through stories carried by communities that no longer exist? Civilizations have disappeared before. The ruins of once powerful empires lie scattered across deserts and jungles. Libraries burned, and with them, entire philosophies. Languages faded until no ear remained that could understand them. We accept these losses because they fit comfortably inside recorded time. But recorded time is shallow. For most of human existence, there were no archives, no inscriptions, no stone monuments designed to outlast centuries. There were only people, living near water, drawn to fertile coasts and river mouths, where food was abundant, and travel was possible. And coastlines are never fixed. At the end of the last ice age, seas rose dramatically as vast ice sheets melted. Shorelines moved inland by miles. Plains became seabeds. Valleys disappeared beneath advancing water. If early communities gathered where land met ocean, as we do today, then many of their settlements now rest beneath hundreds of feet of water. We search for origins on dry ground because it is accessible. But what if the earliest experiments in organized life were washed away before they could turn themselves into stone? What if the greatest catastrophe in human history left behind no ruins, only absence? The idea is not an accusation. It does not require conspiracy or secrecy. It requires only physics, climate, and time. A profound disruption does not need to erase humanity to alter its story. It only needs to interrupt continuity long enough for memory to fragment. From above, the ocean reveals nothing. It glitters in sunlight, calm and indifferent. There are no markers where ancient shorelines once stretched, no monuments breaking the surface to testify to drowned lives. The surface keeps its silence, and in that silence a question begins to form, quietly, almost reluctantly. If human memory fails, perhaps the earth itself remembers. The silence does not end. It deepens. The camera moves downward, beneath the surface of assumption, into places where memory is not spoken but layered. Ice cores rise like frozen timelines pulled from the heart of glaciers. Sediment rests at the bottom of ancient lakes, each layer pressed gently upon the last. Far below the ocean's shifting skin, the seafloor holds patterns carved by rivers that no longer exist. Earth keeps records differently than we do. Near the end of the last ice age, something interrupted a warming world, as glaciers were already retreating and temperatures were climbing. The climate shifted sharply back toward cold. This period is known as the Younger Dryas. It arrived unexpectedly, like winter reclaiming land that had already welcomed spring. For more than 1,000 years, conditions cooled in parts of the northern hemisphere. Then, almost as suddenly, warmth returned. The change was not slow in geological terms. It unfolded within spans measurable in human generations. Ice sheets that had dominated continents began to destabilize. As temperatures rose again, meltwater poured into oceans. Sea levels climbed more than 120 meters over time. The rise was not a single wave, but a relentless advance. Shorelines retreated inland. Low-lying plains disappeared. Estuaries flooded. Islands separated from mainlands. What had been dry earth became seabed. What had been river valleys turned into submerged trenches. Modern mapping technologies reveal outlines beneath the water that resemble forgotten maps. Doggerland once connected Britain to mainland Europe. Sundaland stretched across what is now the shallow seas of Southeast Asia. Beringia formed a vast corridor between Asia and North America. These were not narrow strips of land. They were expansive regions, threaded with rivers, forests, and grasslands, places where animals thrived and humans moved freely. Today they lie silent beneath the ocean. No monuments rise from their depths. No cities break the surface. But the scale alone invites reflection. These territories could have supported extensive populations. They could have held networks of exchange, ritual sites, seasonal gatherings. The point is not to insist that they did. The point is that they might have. And if they did, the physical record would be difficult to reach. Marine archaeology is still young compared to terrestrial excavation. Vast stretches of continental shelf remain unexplored, hidden beneath sediment, obscured by currents. Recovering evidence from such depths requires patience, technology, and resources that have only recently become available. The planet does not announce what it has concealed. It simply preserves. Ice cores capture abrupt temperature swings in their frozen bands. Marine sediments reveal pulses of freshwater entering oceans. Fossil records show species disappearing within compressed windows of time. Together, these archives describe a period of instability, near the end of the last glacial age. Earth changed fast. Species that had roamed for thousands of years declined. Ecosystems reorganized. Climates flipped from cold to warm in spans short enough to be felt within lifetimes. And humans were present. They had already spread across continents. They had adapted to diverse environments, navigated landscapes, followed migrating herds, gathered along rivers and coasts. They were not passive observers of this transformation. When the oceans rose, they did not rise gently. They rose over worlds. What did it mean to stand on a familiar shore and watch it move, year by year, further inland? What did it mean to return to a hunting ground now swallowed by water? How many times could a community retreat before the map in its collective memory no longer matched the terrain beneath its feet? The geological record does not answer these questions directly. It offers data, curves, layers of compressed time. But implication lingers within the numbers. If landscapes vanished beneath water, perhaps memory did not vanish entirely. Perhaps it shifted form, carried away from sinking ground, and preserved somewhere less expected. Long before history was written in stone, it was spoken beside fire. Across continents that had never met, stories emerged of a world overcome by water. In ancient Mesopotamia, a man was warned to build a vessel before the flood arrived. In early Indian traditions, a figure received guidance to preserve life before rising seas erase the land. In the Americas and across Pacific Islands, narratives describe overwhelming waves, a chosen few who survived, and the beginning of a new age after ruin. These cultures developed in isolation, separated by oceans and time. Yet the structure of their stories feels strangely familiar. Water comes suddenly. The old world ends. A smaller remnant remains. Life begins again. The repetition invites reflection. The documentary does not insist these accounts describe a single global event. Myth carries symbolism, moral teaching, spiritual meaning. Water often represents cleansing, renewal, judgment, transformation. Floods occur in river valleys around the world. Local disasters can imprint themselves deeply upon collective memory. But why does flood imagery dominate origin stories so persistently? Why is rebirth so often preceded by immersion? One possibility is simple. During the end of the last ice age, sea levels did not rise in one uniform surge. They advanced unevenly, sometimes accelerating, sometimes stabilizing, sometimes pulsing forward within spans short enough to unsettle entire regions. Communities near coasts and river deltas would have faced repeated encroachment. A village abandoned once, rebuilt inland, abandoned again. Over generations, repeated displacement could compress into a single dramatic narrative. Memory favors clarity. Complex sequences often condense into symbols that travel easily through time. Perhaps there was no single night when the entire world drowned. Perhaps there were many nights, across many centuries, when water arrived without invitation. In that repetition, something deeper may have occurred. Not only physical loss, but interruption. Trade routes dissolving as coastlines shifted. Seasonal migrations disrupted. Knowledge once shared across distances, fragmented as communities retreated into isolation. A network does not need to be destroyed completely to cease functioning. It only needs to lose connection. Imagine distant groups who once exchanged ideas, tools, astronomical observations. As seas rose and territories vanished, contact narrows. Travel routes disappear beneath water. Familiar landmarks fade. Oral traditions persist, but context thins. Communities survive. Humanity endures. But continuity frays. Over time, the memory of disruption may transform into myth. Not as precise chronicle, but as emotional truth. A story of overwhelming water becomes a story of beginnings. A narrative of destruction becomes a narrative of renewal. When the world is forced to begin again, who decides what is remembered? The answer may be simple: whoever survives. Civilization, as we understand it, appears in the archaeological record thousands of years after these climatic shifts. Cities rise. Agriculture expands. Writing develops. Monuments stand deliberately against time. We call this period the dawn. But dawn suggests first light. What if it was morning after a long and disorienting night? If flood stories carry distant echoes of environmental upheaval, they may represent not fantasy, but fragment, not exaggeration, but compression. Civilization may not have ignited in sudden brilliance from ignorance. It may have restarted in fragments, rebuilt by those who carried memory through water and silence. Perhaps what we call the dawn of civilization was actually the aftermath. And if interruption lies at the root of our beginnings, the next question moves beyond story and into mechanism. What kind of force could reshape climate, coastlines, and memory all at once? The camera lifts away from oceans and continents, rising into the darkness beyond the atmosphere. From this distance, Earth looks serene, cloud bands curling gently over blue water, sunlight sliding. Across the curve of a living world, it feels isolated, self-contained, stable. But it is not alone. Our planet travels through a dynamic cosmic environment. Around the sun drift cometary, debris fields, fragments left behind by ancient visitors whose orbits stretch far beyond the familiar planets. Asteroids move silently along intersecting paths. Solar activity pulses and fluctuates. Space is not empty. It is active, shifting, occasionally unpredictable. Earth has always moved through this field. Roughly 12,800 years ago, at the close of the last ice age, the climate changed abruptly. A warming trend already underway suddenly reversed. Temperatures in parts of the northern hemisphere dropped sharply in a period known as the Younger Dryas. For over 1,000 years, cold conditions returned before warming resumed just as unexpectedly. Most explanations focus on shifts in ocean circulation and meltwater pulses. Yet another hypothesis has been proposed, one that remains debated but continues to draw attention. Some researchers suggest that fragments of a disintegrating comet may have entered Earth's atmosphere during that period. Instead of a single massive impact, leaving a dramatic crater, smaller fragments could have dispersed across the northern hemisphere. Evidence cited includes unusual concentrations of platinum in sediment layers, microscopic spherules formed by intense heat, tiny diamonds created under extreme pressure. These materials appear in layers dated to the onset of the Younger Dryas. The science is not settled. Many scholars challenge the interpretation. Others argue the evidence deserves deeper exploration. What matters here is not certainty, but possibility. If even part of this hypothesis were correct, the implications would be profound. Fragments striking glacial ice sheets could have generated enormous thermal pulses. Impact over ice does not always leave clear craters. Energy can dissipate differently than when rock meets rock. Sudden heating might destabilize ice fields, releasing vast volumes of fresh water into oceans. Atmospheric disturbances could ignite widespread fires. Dust and debris lofted into the sky might reduce sunlight temporarily, amplifying cooling before melt resumed. The sky would not need to destroy everything. It would only need to disrupt delicate balances. What if the reset began not with rising seas, but with fire falling from the stars? In such a scenario, the sequence becomes layered. First comes impact, perhaps fragmented, perhaps diffuse. Then regional fires. Then abrupt cooling as atmospheric conditions shift. Then destabilize. Ice releasing torrents of meltwater. Then renewed warming as systems recalibrate. Climate does not respond gently to sudden disturbance. Feedback loops amplify change. Ocean currents shift. Ecosystems strain. The idea does not require apocalyptic imagination. It requires physics, thermodynamics, planetary motion. Earth has experienced impacts before. Most left scars. Some left only signatures in chemistry and sediment. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis remains contested because evidence is subtle, fragmented, incomplete. Yet the timing, aligned with abrupt climate reversal, invites continued investigation. This is not about certainty. It is about scale. Our planet exists within a solar system, still forming, still colliding, still shifting. Even minor celestial interactions can ripple through atmospheric and oceanic systems in ways humans would miss humans. Experience as profound upheaval. If something ignited change from above, Earth would not have remained passive. Its response would have unfolded through water, ice, wind, and fire. And if the sky delivered instability, the ground beneath human feet would not have felt steady for long. If the sky delivered instability, Earth would have answered in sequences, not in a single blow. The first shift may have been subtle, fine dust suspended in the atmosphere, sunlight dimmed just enough to cool already vulnerable regions, winters lengthened, growing seasons shortened, ecosystems tuned carefully to temperature and light, strained against unfamiliar patterns. Cooling does not act alone. It sets tension. Under colder conditions, ice can expand or stabilize temporarily, but disturbance often carries momentum. If glacial systems had already begun retreating before this reversal, renewed fluctuation would have weakened their structure. Then, as warming resumed with startling speed, those same ice sheets may have destabilized rapidly. Ice does not melt politely when thresholds are crossed. It fractures. Massive glacial lakes, held in place by walls of ice, can burst without warning. When they do, fresh water rushes forward with extraordinary force. Valleys are carved deeper. Plains are scoured. Rivers reroute themselves. Sediment spreads across landscapes that once seemed permanent. Imagine standing on a ridge as a wall of water surges through land that had known only slow, moving rivers. Imagine returning to a hunting ground transformed into marsh or inland sea. These are not global tidal waves sweeping every continent at once. They are regional devastations repeated across wide geography. Thermal pulses from atmospheric disturbances could ignite forests. Charred layers in sediment hint at widespread burning in some areas. Megafauna, large mammals already navigating climatic stress, shrinking habitats, and disrupted migration routes. Combined pressures accumulate. Extinction does not always roar, sometimes it collapses under weight. The planet shifts through a cascade of responses: cooling, warming, flooding, fire. And yet humanity does not disappear. Archaeological evidence shows continuity. Stone tools persist. Campsites appear above older layers. Genetic studies suggest survival, though sometimes through contraction. In certain regions, population densities appear to decline. Settlements relocate. Long-distance trade networks seem less visible in the record for extended periods. This is the subtle twist. Extinction is dramatic. Interruption is quieter. A civilization can survive a disaster and still lose everything. In a world without centralized archives, without written records, without digital backups, knowledge lives within communities. Astronomy is remembered because elders teach it beneath the night sky. Navigation survives because travelers retrace routes learned from those before them. Agricultural timing passes through observation, repeated across generations. When networks fracture, continuity weakens. If coastal groups are forced inland repeatedly, contact between distant communities narrows. Shared symbols diverge. Techniques evolve in isolation. What once moved along trade routes now remains local. The web thins. No single moment announces collapse. Instead, coordination fades. Large-scale cooperation, necessary for expansive architecture, organized exchange, and sustained cultural complexity, requires stability. It requires predictable seasons and reliable pathways between regions. Remove enough of that stability, and the structure of civilization compresses. People adapt, they survive, they reorganize around smaller units. Knowledge becomes practical rather than expansive. Exploration turns cautious. Energy focuses on immediate resilience rather than long-term monument. Collapse may not have been extinction. It may have been disconnection. The end of the Ice Age was not a single catastrophic event, but a period of cascading instability. Cooling returned briefly. Warming followed forcefully. Seas advanced. Ice fractured. Species vanished. Humans endured. But endurance alone does not preserve complexity. If networks shattered and communities scattered, something subtle may have slipped through the cracks. Not survival, but continuity of accumulated understanding. And if continuity fractured, what remained? Before, writing pressed symbols into clay. Knowledge moved through breath. It lived in voices carried across firelight, in gestures repeated until they settled into ritual. The rising of certain stars marked planting seasons. The tilt of the moon signaled tides, migrations. Navigation followed constellations, etched not on parchment, but in memory. Skill passed from hand to hand, from elder to child, from one generation to the next, in unbroken sequence. In such a world, community was archive. If environmental upheaval scattered populations, if coastlines shifted, rivers rerouted, and familiar corridors vanished, those living archives would fracture. A group forced inland might preserve some traditions but lose contact with distant partners who once shared knowledge. Songs would persist, but details might blur. Practical techniques would survive, but broader networks of exchange would weaken. Over generations, fragments remain. Cohesion dissolves. A story once rooted in precise observation becomes symbolic. A navigation method refined across regions reduces to local familiarity. The memory of shared astronomical patterns narrows to what one sky alone reveals. No drama announces the loss. It happens quietly, within thinning connections. What if humanity did not rise from ignorance, but from amnesia? The question reframes the familiar narrative. We are taught that civilization emerged suddenly around 6,000 years ago. Cities rose in Mesopotamia. Writing appeared. Organized agriculture expanded. Monumental architecture signaled the dawn of structured society. But perhaps dawn is misleading. Sites like Göbekli Tepe suggest coordinated construction earlier than once assumed. Massive stone pillars arranged in careful patterns appear before widespread evidence of settled farming. In that region, early Mesopotamian settlements reveal intricate social organization seemingly poised for complexity. These developments feel abrupt only if we assume nothing preceded them. What if they represent recovery? Not the first spark of order, but a rebuilding of it. Not spontaneous invention from simplicity, but reassembly after interruption. The idea does not require vanished skyscrapers or advanced machinery lost to time. It suggests something subtler and perhaps more human. Cognitive continuity, disrupted, then patiently restored. When networks break, knowledge compresses. When stability returns, fragments can reconnect. Innovations appear rapid because foundations already exist in scattered form. The suddenness we perceive may be the moment when enough pieces align again. Civilization may have restarted more than once. Environmental chaos near the end of the Ice Age could have reduced large-scale coordination without extinguishing humanity. Smaller groups carried practical survival knowledge forward. Over centuries, as climate stabilized and coastlines settled into new positions, expansion became possible again. Gatherings grew larger, exchange widened, monumental projects reappeared, not as miracles, but as milestones marking renewed cohesion. We tend to imagine progress as a steady climb, but interruption followed by reassembly can produce similar results. If early civilization was reconstruction, its memory of prior instability may have survived in subtle forms: myths of floods, stories of lost ages, cycles of destruction and renewal. And if a reset happened once, would we recognize the signs if it began again? The question lingers, not as alarm, but as contemplation. Humanity's strength has always been adaptation. Survival through fragmentation. Reconnection after dispersal. Yet fragility lives within that resilience. When knowledge depends on continuity, and continuity depends on stable networks, disruption does not need to erase memory entirely. It only needs to thin it enough that beginnings feel like origins rather than returns. The silence that surrounds prehistory may not indicate absence of complexity. It may mark the spaces where connection once existed and faded. Beyond this point, the search moves outward again, down through water that swallowed ancient shores where physical traces of interruption may still rest in shadow, waiting for light to reach them. The ocean looks uniform from above, a surface of shifting light, endless and familiar, moving in patient rhythm against modern shores. Fishing boats trace gentle arcs across it. Cargo ships glide along invisible highways. Sunlight flashes and disappears across small waves, revealing nothing of what lies beneath. Then the camera lowers. The horizon fades. The surface slips overhead. Water surrounds everything in a quiet blue expanse. Suspended particles drift slowly, catching filtered light. The seabed emerges not as chaos, but as chaos. Landscape. Because it is landscape. During the last ice age, when vast ice sheets locked away enormous volumes of water, sea levels were dramatically lower than they are today. What is now shallow continental shelf once stood as Dryas, ground. Rivers cut through valleys that are now submerged. Grasslands stretched where fishing trawlers now pass without pause. Doggerland once connected Britain to mainland Europe. It was not a narrow bridge, but a broad plain, threaded with waterways, home to animals and human groups who moved freely across it. Sundaland formed an enormous extension of Southeast Asia, linking islands now separated by sea into a single ecological region rich with forests and rivers. Beringia joined Asia and North America, allowing migrations across terrain that felt continuous rather than divided by ocean. These were not edges of continents. They were continents. Sea levels did not creep upward by inches in a way that would go unnoticed. Over thousands of years, they rose more than 120 meters. Sometimes the increase was gradual. At other moments, meltwater pulses accelerated the change. A shoreline remembered in childhood could be several miles inland by adulthood. A river mouth could become a widening bay within a generation. Communities living near coasts would have retreated repeatedly. Homes dismantled, camps relocated, paths redefined. Each move narrowing the available land, each advance of water erasing a piece of familiar ground. Eventually, retreat meets geography. There is nowhere left to go. What appears calm today covers valleys where fresh water once flowed. Sonar mapping reveals ancient river channels now preserved in sediment. Underwater surveys detect ridgelines and depressions, follow patterns of terrestrial erosion. These formations are not speculation. They are measurable. Modern archaeology has explored only a fraction of these drowned regions. Marine excavation is complex, expensive, technically demanding. Much of what we know about submerged prehistory comes not from systematic exploration, but from accident. Offshore construction projects uncover stone tools trapped in seabed deposits. Trawlers occasionally pull up worked flint, in some places preserved. Human footprints have been discovered along coastlines newly exposed by erosion. These fragments are rare, but they are real. No one is claiming marble cities, lost beneath every sea. No shimmering towers, rest intact beneath the waves. But if early complexity formed near fertile coasts, as human settlement patterns suggest, then the majority of those early sites would now lie underwater. Our excavations on dry land may capture only what survived retreat. Most of our attention has been directed toward places that remained above sea level. But prehistory's most important chapter may lie underwater. The unsettling possibility is not that oceans hide impossible wonders. It is that they hide ordinary beginnings, gatherings, exchanges, experiments in organization, that never had the chance to turn themselves into permanent stone. The birthplaces of civilization may not have vanished in fire or conquest. They may have dissolved beneath tides so gradual that later generations simply adapted and moved on. What if the birthplaces of civilization now rest beneath waves so ordinary we no longer question them? If landscapes were drowned, the next question sharpens. Are there signs, physical, measurable, that suggest organized human activity still hidden beneath the sea, waiting for us to look more closely? Beneath the surface, stone interrupts the softness of sediment. Off the coast of Japan, divers descend toward a formation of angular terraces and broad steps carved into bedrock. At first glance, the shapes seem deliberate, flat planes meeting sharp edges, corners stacked upon corners. Some observers see the remains of a submerged monument. Others see geology shaped by fracturing and erosion. The sea moves quietly across both interpretations. Near the shores of India, divers have photographed what appear to be walls and blocks resting beneath shifting sands. In parts of the Mediterranean, aligned stones have been detected behind present-day waterlines arranged in patterns that suggest human intervention. Each site carries its own debate, its own measurements, its own contested conclusions. No dramatic declarations settle the matter. Natural rock can break along straight lines. Tectonic pressure can create angular formations. Wave action can expose structures that resemble design. Skepticism is not dismissal, it is discipline. Marine archaeology requires caution because water distorts perspective, conceals context, and complicates dating. Yet questions persist. Some submerged formations lie at depths consistent with lower sea levels thousands of years ago. Whether entirely natural or partly modified by human hands, they indicate something simple, important. Landscapes now underwater were once accessible terrain. Human groups moved through them, hunted across them, possibly gathered upon elevated ground overlooking rivers that no longer flow in air. When stone appears beneath the sea, do we see geology? Or do we hesitate to see something else? The tension between evidence and interpretation is not new. Institutions move carefully, especially when claims suggest revising established timelines. Funding for large-scale marine excavation lags behind terrestrial research. It is easier to dig in dry soil than to survey kilometers of seabed beneath currents and sediment. That caution is justified. Extraordinary conclusions require careful data. But there is another tension beneath the debate. If early settlements favored coasts, if fertile deltas and estuaries provided reliable food and transport, then the most promising places to search for organized activity now lie submerged. Absence of widespread underwater discoveries may reflect the infancy of marine archaeology, rather than definitive absence of past habitations. We imagine early humans as small bands wandering open plains, improvising survival one season at a time. That image contains truth. For most of our existence, mobility was essential. Yet, mobility does not exclude coordination. Hunter-gatherer societies are often portrayed as simple, but complexity is not measured solely by permanent stone structures. Social networks can extend across vast distances. Shared symbols can unify groups who gather seasonally, trade in stone, shells, pigments, and ideas, can move along corridors invisible to modern maps. If coastlines shifted dramatically, those corridors may have vanished beneath water. Human beings have always been adaptive, inventive, socially connected. The question is not whether they possessed skyscrapers or lost technology. The question is whether their scale of organization has been underestimated because much of its physical trace is now inaccessible. A submerged platform might be natural rock. A linear arrangement of stones might be coincidence, or it might represent a meeting place long since claimed by the sea. The evidence is incomplete. The debates are ongoing. But the philosophical tension remains. If most early activity clustered along coastlines that no longer exist in air, our mental picture of prehistory may be skewed by geography. We study what remains above water and build narratives around it. What lies below receives less attention, less funding, fewer expeditions. And so the sea holds its silence. If evidence lies fragmented beneath the ocean, perhaps clues exist, not only in stone, but in something less eroded. Systems of knowledge that seem to appear inland, suddenly and almost fully formed, as though they were carried from elsewhere. Far from the coast, where hills rise from dry plains and horizons feel stable beneath open sky, stone circles stand in silent geometry. Göbekli Tepe emerges from the earth like a memory surfacing. Massive pillars arranged in rings, carvings of animals etched with intention, precision without permanence of settlement surrounding it. When this site was first excavated, it unsettled timelines. The structures predated widespread agriculture in the region. They suggested organized labor, symbolic depth, coordination among groups whose nations were not yet living in fully developed cities. Monumentality appeared earlier than expected. Similar enigmas echo elsewhere. Megalithic sites across continents reveal stones transported over distances that required planning and cooperation. Alignments with celestial events hint at careful observation of the sky. In multiple regions, architecture seems to leap forward, as if understanding preceded its visible record. The explanation does not require lost super technology. No vanished machines are needed to lift stone or chart stars. Human intelligence has always been formidable. What remains puzzling is timing. Where did the organizational capacity come from? Why do large symbolic centers appear in places where clear evidence of long-established sedentary society is limited or still emerging? Why does monumental ambition surface before the conventional markers of civilization? Dense cities, formal writing, bureaucratic systems. One possibility is gradual local development that left minimal trace. Another possibility is that these inland sites represent convergence points, places where scattered groups gathered, bringing with them fragments of shared knowledge. What if complex coordination preceded what we call civilization? But earlier manifestations were erased along vulnerable coasts. If rising seas displaced coastal populations, groups may have moved inland carrying traditions already matured. Astronomical awareness does not need stone observatories to begin. Social hierarchies can form around ritual long before permanent cities appear. Skills in quarrying and construction can exist without leaving extensive settlements if materials were once organic and perishable. The visible emergence of monument does not necessarily mark the birth of complexity. It may mark the moment complexity became anchored in stone. What if the first great monuments were not declarations of dominance, but acts of remembrance? Stone circles may have served not only as gathering places, but as stabilizing structures in a world recently destabilized. Ritual can bind dispersed communities. Shared symbolism can rebuild networks. Architecture can declare continuity when geography has erased familiar ground. Perhaps inland monumental sites represent cultural consolidation after displacement. Communities forced from shifting coasts may have sought higher ground, both literally and symbolically. There, away from advancing water, they could reconstruct identity in visible, durable form, not the first rise, but a rebuilding. When viewed through this lens, the sudden appearance of organized ritual centers feels less abrupt. It becomes the visible crest of a longer, quieter story. One in which cognitive continuity survived. Fragmentation. Civilization does not need to begin from nothing to feel new. It only needs enough stability for fragments to reconnect. Imagine survivors from different regions meeting on elevated terrain. Each carries knowledge shaped by prior landscapes, songs of tides, observations of stars above former shores. Techniques honed through adaptation. In gathering, they compare memory, align stories, establish shared markers. They raise stone not to dominate nature, but to fix meaning in a world that recently shifted beneath their feet. The monuments endure because they were built after instability, not before it. They stand inland because coastlines could no longer be trusted. And if what we call the dawn of civilization was in fact a phase of reconstruction, the next question becomes inevitable. Why does mainstream history frame this moment as a clear beginning, rather than recovery from something earlier, quieter, and perhaps lost? The story most of us inherit does not begin underwater or beneath ice. It begins in classrooms. In diagrams and timelines printed neatly across pages, human history unfolds as a steady ascent. Hunter-gatherers discover agriculture. Villages form. Villages become cities. Bronze replaces stone. Iron replaces bronze. Complexity increases. Knowledge accumulates. The line moves forward. This framework is clean. It provides order where the past might otherwise feel chaotic. It reassures us that progress, once begun, rarely reverses. Civilization appears as an inevitable result of human intelligence steadily refining itself. Yet history, even within recorded time, does not always behave so smoothly. Empires rise and fall, trade networks expand, and then collapse. The Roman world once coordinated vast territories under shared law and infrastructure, then fractured into smaller realms. The late Bronze Age saw flourishing cities across the Mediterranean, followed by widespread disruption and darkened records. In jungles and deserts, abandoned cities testify to shifts in climate, economy, or conflict that reshaped once stable societies. Complexity does not only increase, it sometimes contracts. If collapse and rebuilding occur within written history, when documents survive to describe them, why assume that prehistory followed an uninterrupted curve upward? Why imagine that early human development progressed without major interruption simply because we lack records of reversals? What if history's straight line exists only because we cannot see the earlier bends? Our understanding of beginnings often depends on the earliest evidence that remains accessible. When archaeologists uncover the first surviving city walls, those walls become the start of urban life in that region. When early writing appears in durable materials, it marks the onset of recorded civilization. But survival biases interpretation. If earlier layers were constructed from wood, fiber, earth, and other materials vulnerable to erosion, their absence does not confirm non-existence. It confirms fragility. The earliest surviving evidence becomes the default origin point, simply because nothing older endured in visible form. This is not deception. It is limitation. Historical models are built upon available data. When data shifts, models adjust. Yet foundational narratives, once established, carry momentum. Linear progression offers clarity. It simplifies teaching. It organizes vast spans of time into digestible segments. If coastal settlements disappeared beneath rising seas, if environmental instability fractured large-scale networks, if cultural memory compressed into myth, the earliest visible resurgence of organized society inland might be mistaken for invention rather than reassembly. We tend to equate visibility with origin. The first structure we can see becomes the first structure we imagine. The earliest text we can read becomes the earliest thought we assume existed. Yet absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is often evidence of change, erosion, submergence, displacement. The linear model of history serves an important purpose. It captures broad patterns of development, but broad patterns can mask turbulence beneath them. They can smooth jagged edges into gentle slopes. If prehistory contains cycles of growth, disruption, and rebuilding, those cycles may not appear clearly in our textbooks because their physical traces are incomplete. This possibility does not require hidden vaults or intentional suppression. It requires only recognition that narratives simplify. They distill. They reduce complexity to coherent arcs. Perspective is not accusation. It is widening. When we allow for bends in the line, the story grows less certain but more human. Progress remains real. Innovation remains remarkable. Yet beneath them, may lie episodes of interruption that shaped what survived. If our framework can simplify unintentionally, the next question becomes inevitable. How do institutions respond when new evidence suggests that the line may need to curve? When ideas challenge familiar timelines, it is tempting to imagine resistance as intentional. The word cover-up carries weight. It suggests hidden meetings, locked archives, knowledge withheld from public view. That image is powerful, but it is not always necessary to explain silence. Scientific understanding does not shift quickly. It moves through careful accumulation of evidence, through debate, replication, and peer review. Careers are built upon specific interpretations of data. Funding flows toward projects aligned with established frameworks. Universities teach models that have proven reliable across decades of research. This is not corruption. It is structure. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, not because institutions are hostile to new ideas, but because revising foundational narratives affects entire fields. Changing the story of early civilization would ripple through archaeology, anthropology, geology, and history alike. Such revision demands proof that withstands scrutiny from multiple angles. Underwater archaeology illustrates the challenge. Surveying continental shelves requires advanced equipment, large teams, and considerable resources. Even when anomalies are detected, dating them precisely can be complex. Sediment shifts. Organic materials decay. Context is often partial. A single promising discovery rarely overturns a framework built upon thousands of terrestrial excavations. Similarly, deep time catastrophe models depend on interdisciplinary evidence. Geochemistry, climate modeling, sediment analysis, and archaeological correlation must align convincingly before conclusions solidify. Disagreements over interpretation are not uncommon. Debate is part of scientific culture. Does a story need to be suppressed if it simply does not fit the frame? Sometimes absence of discussion reflects caution rather than concealment. If data is incomplete, scholars hesitate to extrapolate too far. Hypotheses that stretch beyond consensus face higher evidentiary thresholds. Researchers must weigh professional credibility alongside curiosity. Structural conservatism within knowledge systems can feel like resistance, yet it often protects against premature conclusions. Paradigms shift when evidence accumulates beyond reasonable doubt, not when speculation first appears. This dynamic does not deny the possibility of oversight. History shows that institutions can resist disruptive ideas longer than necessary. But resistance does not automatically imply coordinated secrecy. It may simply indicate the friction inherent in revising established maps. The reset hypothesis exists within this tension. It gathers strands from geology, mythology, and archaeology. It raises questions that remain open, but it has not yet crossed the threshold of overwhelming proof required to redraw foundational narratives. No shadowy vaults are needed to explain its marginal status, only the slow mechanics of academic caution. The tone here matters. Sensational accusations erode credibility. Measured inquiry strengthens it. If the possibility of interruption in deep prehistory deserves attention, it must stand on evidence strong enough to support scrutiny from multiple disciplines. The absence of widespread acceptance does not confirm suppression. It may confirm uncertainty. Understanding this distinction allows curiosity without cynicism. It permits exploration without assuming villainy. Complex systems of knowledge move deliberately, and sometimes that deliberation feels like silence. If the reset hypothesis is neither fully accepted nor fully dismissed, then the conversation shifts naturally. What would evidence strong enough to change the narrative actually look like? For an idea to move from possibility to accepted history, it must cross a demanding boundary. Speculation is easy. Revision is costly. To confirm or refute a prehistoric reset, the evidence would need to be precise, measurable, and repeatable across disciplines. Imagine what that threshold might require. Large-scale marine excavations would need to uncover unmistakable signs of organized human settlement on now submerged continental shelves. Foundations anchored in soil layers dated clearly to periods before sea levels rose. Tools embedded within context, not displaced by currents. Structured arrangements that cannot be dismissed as natural formations. Radiometric dating aligned with known climate transitions. High-resolution seabed mapping already reveals river channels, ancient shorelines, and terraces beneath shallow seas. Yet, mapping terrain is not the same as excavating culture. Underwater drones glide over vast stretches of sediment where centuries of shifting currents may have concealed or fragmented fragile remains. Each promising anomaly demands time, funding, and careful analysis. Genetic research would also need to align with environmental evidence in unmistakable ways. Population bottlenecks would correlate tightly with known climatic upheavals. Patterns of migration would reflect sudden dispersal, followed by reorganization. Independent lines of inquiry, geology, archaeology, genetics, would converge without contradiction. The bar is appropriately high. We stand at the edge of technological capability that earlier generations could not imagine. Autonomous submersibles scan the ocean floor in detail. Sonar pulses reveal contours hidden beneath darkness. Sediment cores extract thin layers of deep time, capturing chemical signatures of abrupt change. Satellite modeling reconstructs ancient coastlines with increasing accuracy. And yet, vast areas remain unexplored. Continental shelves around the globe stretch across millions of square kilometers. Much of this terrain has never been systematically surveyed, let alone excavated. Time, cost, and complexity slow progress. Discoveries emerge incrementally. If evidence lies beneath these waters, it may take generations to uncover, and even longer for its implications to settle into collective understanding. Paradigm shifts rarely happen overnight. They advance through accumulation, through patient examination, through disagreement, refined into clarity. If the past waits beneath the sea, how long before curiosity becomes excavation? The answer may depend less on belief and more on persistence. Scientific caution does not eliminate mystery, it shapes its pursuit. Skepticism demands stronger proof, which in turn motivates more rigorous exploration. The absence of immediate confirmation does not close the question. It leaves it suspended. Not conclusion, not denial. But threshold. Standing at a threshold means recognizing both limits and possibilities. It means accepting that knowledge expands unevenly. It means allowing uncertainty to coexist with investigation. If humanity once rebuilt after planetary disruption, perhaps the evidence of that rebuilding rests in places only now becoming accessible. Perhaps physical traces lie quiet beneath sediment, waiting for tools capable of reaching them. Or perhaps deeper study will reveal that interruption was less dramatic than imagined. Either outcome reshapes understanding. As this chapter closes, certainty remains elusive. Yet the horizon feels wider than before. The map of prehistory contains blank spaces, not because nothing existed there, but because we have only begun to look. Beyond stone and seabed, another archive holds clues. Within the human body itself, where traces of contraction and migration may still be written in patterns of shared ancestry. The search moves inward, away from drowned plains and fractured stone, away from sediment and sky, into something far more intimate. Within every living human being lies an archive older than monuments. It does not rest beneath oceans or deserts. It travels within us. DNA carries memory without narrative. It preserves patterns of survival and loss, written not in words, but in variation. Scientists study these patterns to understand how populations expanded, migrated, and sometimes contracted. When humanity thrived across wide territories, genetic diversity broadened. When numbers narrowed dramatically, diversity compressed. This compression is known as a bottleneck. A population bottleneck occurs when the number of individuals declines sharply, leaving fewer genetic lines to continue forward. Over generations, certain variations disappear, simply because fewer people remain to carry them. The genetic record becomes tighter, more uniform, reflecting a time when survival was concentrated among a smaller group. Mitochondrial DNA, passed through maternal lines, offers one lens into these ancient contractions. Y chromosome studies trace paternal ancestry. Together, they provide overlapping windows into deep history. They reveal migrations across continents, expansions during stable climates, and reductions during periods of stress. Geneticists do not read catastrophe directly from DNA. What they observe are fluctuations in effective population size, moments when the human story appears compressed before expanding again. Some research suggests that significant reductions in human numbers align with periods of severe climatic instability. Around the end of the last ice age, when temperatures fluctuated sharply and ecosystems transformed, certain genetic models indicate contraction. The data is complex and debated, yet the alignment draws attention. Climate stress, environmental upheaval, megafaunal extinction, population bottlenecks. These phenomena cluster in overlapping windows of time. The interpretation requires care. Correlation does not prove causation. Population reduction can arise from many factors: migration into new territories, localized environmental strain, social reorganization. No single genetic study declares a global collapse. The evidence speaks in probabilities, not proclamations. Yet, the alignment remains intriguing. Human beings endured the volatility of the late Ice Age. They crossed continents, adapted to diverse environments, developed tools and cultural systems sophisticated enough to ensure survival. But endurance through contraction is not the same as unbroken continuity. When numbers shrink, networks shrink. If communities once connected across long distances were reduced or scattered, the web of shared knowledge would thin. Innovation thrives in exchange. Ideas expand when they move between groups. Compression narrows that exchange. What if the reset was written not only in stone, but in our blood? The genetic record does not describe cities lost to rising seas. It does not specify rituals abandoned or languages forgotten, but it does whisper of moments when humanity drew inward, when survival passed through fewer hands. After contraction, expansion resumes. Diversity increases again. Migration accelerates. Yet the expansion emerges from a narrower base. Survival has always defined our species. We adapt, reorganize, rebuild. But if knowledge lives within people, and people temporarily become fewer, something subtle changes. Perhaps skills persist. Perhaps core memory remains. Yet, complexity dependent on large, interconnected populations may require time to reassemble. The story in our genes does not confirm a single cataclysm. It reveals vulnerability, intertwined with resilience. It shows that humanity has passed through constrictions before, and it raises a quiet question. If knowledge exists within networks of people, what happens when those networks shrink dramatically? If populations contracted and scattered under climatic pressure? The next question emerges naturally. What knowledge survived those contractions, and how was it carried forward? Long before parchment, before ink, before inscriptions carved into stone, memory travelled through voice. In small communities gathered beneath open sky, knowledge did not live in libraries. It lived in repetition. Elders traced the movement of stars through story. The return of certain constellations signalled planting or migration. Tides were anticipated not through charts, but through songs that marked the rhythm of the moon. Navigation across deserts and oceans followed narratives woven carefully into melody. When knowledge can no longer be stored in cities, it hides inside stories. Oral societies preserve information differently. Accuracy depends on rhythm, ritual, and meaning. A story repeated across generations is less likely to be forgotten if it carries symbolic weight. Astronomy becomes myth not because it is imagined, but because narrative holds attention longer than data alone. If environmental disruption fractured communities, if coastlines vanished, routes disappeared, and networks thinned, transmission would change. A group moving inland might retain star knowledge, but lose reference to maritime navigation. A ritual marking flood cycles might persist long after the specific river that inspired it altered course. Fragments endure. Cohesion softens. Over time, practical systems may dissolve into metaphor. A detailed understanding of seasonal oscillation compresses into a tale of gods battling for control of sky and sea. A memory of repeated regional flooding condenses into a single grand deluge in story form. This does not imply fabrication. It reflects adaptation. Across continents, distant cultures identify similar star clusters and embed them within narrative frameworks. The Pleiades, Orion, the arc of the Milky Way. Patterns in the sky have guided observation and belief for thousands of years. Flood cycles appear within ceremonial calendars, encoded in rituals that mark renewal after destruction. The parallels do not demand a single origin. Human cognition responds to shared sky and shared vulnerability. Yet the recurrence invites consideration. Perhaps some myths preserve environmental memory, older than written documentation, not in literal detail, but in shape, in emphasis, in emotional imprint. The idea requires humility. Oral tradition is fluid. It evolves. Symbol layers upon symbol. Precision may fade as generations pass. Survival does not guarantee continuity of detail. It guarantees continuity of story. If communities endured climatic turbulence and shrinking networks, they may have preserved what they could in durable form. Ritual, song, symbol. Context might blur, but meaning persists. The story of overwhelming water may endure because it captures a felt truth. Even if geography shifts, modern scholarship often approaches myth through symbolic analysis. It seeks metaphor, moral lesson, cultural identity. These approaches are valuable. Yet occasionally, myth may represent compressed memory, layers of lived experience distilled into narrative that can survive migration and fragmentation. The goal is not to romanticize lost civilizations hidden beneath waves. It is to recognize resilience. Humans preserve significance even when circumstance erodes clarity. A ceremony marking renewal after flood may carry within it a distant recollection of landscapes that once existed differently. Fragments carried forward shape, culture, long after original conditions vanish. If oral transmission bridged periods of contraction, the past may linger in subtle form, within language, pattern, ritual. But memory encoded in story is only one archive. If disruption affected climate, species, and human networks simultaneously, traces should appear elsewhere. In ecosystems reshaped, in extinctions clustered within narrow windows of time. If fragments endured within culture, perhaps physical traces of upheaval remain embedded not only in DNA and myth, but in the living world itself. At the close of the Ice Age, the land still held giants. Woolly mammoths moved across frozen plains in slow, deliberate herds. Giant ground sloths towered against ancient forests. Saber-toothed predators stalked prey with precision, honed over millennia. For thousands of years, these animals shaped ecosystems across continents. They carved pathways through grasslands, dispersed seeds, altered vegetation simply by existing. Then, within what appears in geological terms to be a narrow window of time, many of them vanished. The reasons remain debated. Some researchers emphasize human expansion. As modern humans spread into new territories, they hunted unfamiliar prey, possibly pushing already stressed populations toward decline. Others highlight climatic shifts. The sudden cold of the Younger Dryas, followed by abrupt warming. Rapid change disrupts food chains. Habitats shrink. Breeding patterns falter. The most persuasive explanations may not choose between these forces. They combine them. Imagine a world already unsettled by environmental instability. Temperatures fluctuate. Vegetation patterns shift. Water routes change. Large animals adapted to stable ecosystems begin to struggle. At the same time, highly capable human hunters expand into their ranges. Even moderate additional pressure on a fragile population can accelerate collapse. The extinction window of many megafaunal species overlaps with periods of significant climatic turbulence near the end of the last glacial age. The alignment is difficult to ignore. When the giants fell, what followed them into silence? The disappearance of megafauna was not merely the loss of impressive creatures. It altered ecosystems at scale. Large herbivores shape landscapes. Their grazing patterns influence plant growth. Their movements open migration corridors for smaller species. Remove them, and systems reorganize. For human communities, the consequences were immediate. In many regions, these animals were primary food sources. Their hides provided warmth. Their bones offered tools. Their predictable migratory routes, structured, seasonal movement. If herds dwindled, hunting groups would face scarcity. Mobility would increase. Competition for resources would intensify. Ecosystems under stress can trigger cascading effects. As large prey vanish, smaller species are hunted more intensely. Forest composition changes. Fire frequency shifts. Rivers carry different sediment loads as vegetation alters. The biosphere recalibrates. but the recalibration can feel chaotic within a single lifetime. This was not necessarily a single catastrophic blow delivered in 1 year. It was acceleration, pressure building atop pressure. For early humans, the landscape itself would have felt unstable. Familiar grazing grounds, no longer filled with mammoths. Valleys once marked by reliable migration grew quiet. Rivers shifted course as meltwater surged. Coasts crept inland. Not extinction of humanity, but disruption deep enough to feel like the end of the world they knew. Ecological collapse at large scale reshaped societies without erasing them. Populations contract as food becomes scarce. Groups fragment as they search for new territories. Networks thin. Knowledge tied to particular species and routes loses relevance. If megafaunal extinction coincided with rapid climate fluctuation, the combined strain could have pressed human systems toward reorganization. Survival would demand adaptation. Old patterns would yield to new strategies. The giants disappearing into silence mark more than biological change. They signal transition, a threshold crossed, when species that dominated landscapes for thousands of years vanish within compressed periods. The stability of the entire biosphere shifts. Human communities living within that biosphere must shift as well. The image lingers, small groups of people standing on altered ground, watching herds grow thin, rivers reroute, horizons change. The world had not ended, but it no longer resembled the one they remembered. From this landscape of contraction and adaptation, something else would eventually rise. Not animals this time, but structures of stone built inland, steady against uncertainty. The ground appears dry and ordinary at first. Low hills rise gently from the plain. Dust moves in small currents across the surface. Nothing suggests that beneath this soil rests one of the oldest monumental sites ever uncovered. Then the earth opens and stone emerges. Massive pillars stand arranged in circular enclosures, some towering above a human figure. Their surfaces bear carved animals, foxes, boars, birds, rendered with deliberate hands. Lines and symbols suggest attention not only to form, but to meaning. The arrangement is intentional. The scale is undeniable. Göbekli Tepe unsettled assumptions when it was revealed. Dating places these structures thousands of years before widespread, settled agriculture in the surrounding region. At a time when the dominant narrative imagined small bands of hunter-gatherers moving lightly across landscapes, here stood evidence of organized labor, capable of quarrying, transporting, and shaping multi-ton stones. The older model seemed simple. Agriculture produced food surplus. Surplus allowed specialization. Specialization allowed architecture. Monument followed farming. Yet here was monument without clear evidence of farming as its foundation. What if the first great temples were built not at humanity's beginning, but at its return? The site does not suggest lost machines or forgotten metallurgy. The stones were shaped with tools consistent with the period. The builders were fully human, fully capable, working within material available to them. The mystery lies not in impossible technology, but in coordination. Large groups had to gather. Tasks had to be organized. Labor had to be distributed. Purpose had to be shared strongly enough to motivate effort beyond immediate survival. Why would communities invest such energy in constructing monumental enclosures before establishing permanent agricultural cities? One possibility shifts the question slightly. Perhaps large-scale ritual gatherings preceded agriculture, rather than followed it. Perhaps communities dispersed by environmental instability needed central places to reconnect. Elevated ground, away from unstable coasts and shifting rivers, may have offered security. Ritual repeated seasonally could draw scattered groups back together. In gathering, knowledge reconnects. Stories align, skills exchange, partnerships form. Marriage networks widen. Symbolic architecture anchors identity within shared space. Monument then becomes more than spiritual expression. It becomes social reconstruction. After periods of disruption, communities require cohesion. They require markers of continuity. Stone circles can frame the sky, aligning with celestial events that define agricultural cycles, yet to be formalized. Carvings encode shared symbols, recognized across groups. Agriculture may even follow ritual. When people gather predictably in large numbers, the incentive to cultivate nearby land increases. Food production can support sustained interaction. Settlement becomes more stable, not as cause of monument, but as consequence. In this view, the sudden appearance of monumental architecture inland does not represent the first spark of civilization. It represents consolidation after fragmentation. Communities shaped by climate volatility and ecological change may have sought durable forms. Stone endures where wood and fibre decay. It withstands seasons that once shifted violently. Reassures. Monument may represent healing. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe do not speak in words. They stand in arrangement, oriented toward the sky. Their placement suggests attention to cycles larger than any single lifetime. In building them, humans inscribed meaning into ground that no longer felt reliable. This is not the birth of intelligence. It is the reaffirmation of connection. After disruption, communities gather, they build. They mark sky and season. They anchor memory in place. If monuments anchored recovery in one region, it becomes reasonable to ask whether similar rebuilding efforts unfolded elsewhere. Not through empire or shared command, but through shared need. From a distance, the pillars of Göbekli Tepe stand alone against dry hills, but widen the lens, and stone begins to rise in other places. Across Europe, massive megaliths align with solstices and equinoxes, their shadows marking the turning of seasons. In parts of Asia, ancient observatories track lunar cycles with quiet precision. Across the Americas, earthworks and stone platforms reflect attention to celestial movements. Oceans separate these structures. Cultures differ in language, ritual, and identity, yet certain patterns repeat. Stones are arranged to frame the sky. Horizon lines are carved into architecture. Seasonal light is captured deliberately. The suggestion is not of a single, lost empire broadcasting knowledge across continents. There is no need for vanished fleets uniting distant peoples under one command. Convergent behavior can emerge independently when circumstances demand it. When the sky becomes uncertain, what do humans build to steady it? If environmental instability altered the rhythms communities depended upon, careful observation of celestial patterns would become essential. The rising of certain stars could signal safe planting. Windows after unpredictable winters. Solar alignment might anchor calendars in a world where seasons felt unstable. Lunar tracking could guide migration when ecosystems shifted. Sky watching may have intensified after periods of disruption, not because humans suddenly became curious, but because survival required recalibrations. Shared cosmological symbolism does not demand centralized coordination. The same stars shine across hemispheres. The same moon shapes tides and night. Independent communities responding to environmental stress could reach similar conclusions about how to encode sky knowledge into durable form. Stone serves that purpose well. Unlike wood or earth, it endures across generations. It preserves alignment with celestial events long after those who positioned it are gone. It provides fixed reference points in landscapes may otherwise change. Monuments may encode recovery knowledge. A circle aligned to solstice sunrise does more than honor the sun. It establishes a communal marker of seasonal certainty. It tells future generations when warmth will return. It stabilizes expectation. Stone may represent resilience. The repetition of certain motifs, serpents, birds, solar discs, does not automatically imply shared ancestry. Symbols evolve to express universal human concerns: life, death, renewal, sky, water. Cultural parallels can arise from shared cognitive frameworks, shaped by similar challenges. After environmental stress, rebuilding does not unfold in chaos. It often unfolds methodically. Communities draw upon memory, compare observations, formalize ritual, and create structures that bind dispersed groups. Seen this way, the reemergence of monumental architecture across regions appears less mysterious and more coherent. It reflects organized responses to instability. It suggests populations capable of love, coordination, planning, and shared intention, as if something remembered how to rebuild. Civilizations return, if that is what these monuments signify, does not resemble a sudden explosion of novelty. It resembles consolidation. Patterns align. Calendars stabilize. Social cohesion strengthens. The quiet order embedded within these structures hints at continuity, rather than invention from nothing. If rebuilding followed disruption, if inland monuments anchored recovery after fragmentation, then one question becomes unavoidable. Why does the idea of a global reset feel controversial, almost forbidden, even when the evidence we examine invites measured reconsideration? The word settles into the conversation slowly. Reset. Not apocalypse, not extinction, not the dramatic end of humanity. A reset is quieter than that. It suggests interruption, recalibration, a system disrupted and then started again under altered conditions. Yet, even this softer term carries weight. It unsettles because it challenges a story many of us carry comfortably. The story of steady ascent. We imagine progress as continuous, even when history shows interruptions along the way. We accept collapses within recorded time, but we often assume that before writing began, humanity moved in a largely upward arc toward stability. A reset introduces fragility into that arc. It implies that complexity can compress, that networks can thin, that what feels permanent may, under certain conditions, unravel and later reform. It does not accuse anyone of hiding truth. It does not require shadowy rooms or deliberate erasure. It requires only vulnerability. If history has turned before, who says it moves in only one direction? Ancient cultures often imagined time not as a straight path, but as cycles. Golden ages followed by decline. Worlds ending in fire or flood, only to begin again in altered form. These stories vary in formally detail, yet they share a structural rhythm: creation, flourishing, collapse, renewal. Modern thought tends to favor linear momentum. Innovation replaces stagnation. Knowledge accumulates. Each generation stands higher than the last. Both models contain truth. Humanity survived the Ice Age. It adapted to abrupt climate shifts. It reorganized after ecological strain. It built inland monuments. It cultivated land. It established cities. The evidence of evidence. Resilience is undeniable. But resilience does not guarantee uninterrupted ascent. Rebuilding is not the same as never having fractured. The resistance to the word reset may stem less from evidence and more from implication. It suggests that stability is conditional, that permanence is a perception rather than a guarantee. Civilization rests upon balances, climate, ecology, networks that can shift. This does not mean they will. It means they can. The concept does not demand malicious cover-up. It does not insist upon forbidden knowledge locked away from view. It may simply ask us to reconsider comfort with continuity. In this light, reset becomes less dramatic and more human. Systems fail and restart. Forests burn and regenerate. Civilizations contract and expand. Patterns recur without repeating identically. The past shows both rupture and recovery. What feels controversial may be the suggestion that vulnerability shaped us more deeply than we prefer to acknowledge. Humanity rebuilt after instability because adaptation defines us. Knowledge persisted in fragments. Communities gathered. Stone-anchored ritual. Agriculture followed. Writing eventually etched continuity into clay. The climb resumed. But the climb may not have been unbroken. As this chapter closes, no alarms sound. No predictions are made. Only a suspended question rests quietly at the edge of thought. If Earth reset once, is it immune to doing so again? There is no answer offered here, only reflection, and the recognition that examining deep prehistory is not about fear. It is about understanding patterns that may echo faintly in the present. The view shifts forward in time. Satellites trace silent paths above the planet, blinking in ordered constellations of metal and code. Cargo ships cross oceans with steady precision, carrying grain, fuel, silicon, medicine. Cities pulse with electric light, long after the sun has set, their outlines visible from space, like luminous webs stretched across continents. Humanity appears more powerful than ever before. Signals travel instantly between hemispheres. Weather can be modeled weeks in advance. Supply chains move components assembled in one country to factories in another, arriving exactly when needed. A device in one pocket may depend upon minerals mined on a distant continent, refined in another, designed in a third. The system feels immense and durable. Yet beneath that complexity lies something quiet and delicate. Modern civilization operates on coordination. Food distribution depends on transportation networks functioning without interruption. Digital infrastructure relies on constant electricity and stable climate-controlled environments. Financial systems move data through servers that must remain synchronized. Coastlines host dense cities built on assumptions of relative sea level stability. Communication satellites depend on precise orbital paths and uninterrupted maintenance. None of this feels fragile in daily life, but most of it operates on thin margins. A port closure delays shipments across oceans. A damaged undersea cable slows communication between countries. A prolonged drought affects harvests thousands of miles from those who rely upon them. Disturbance in one region ripples outward through shared systems. What makes a civilization powerful can also make it vulnerable. Never before has humanity been so technologically advanced. We have mapped genomes, split atoms, landed probes on distant worlds. Yet never before has our daily functioning depended so completely on continuous global coordination. Interconnection amplifies efficiency. It also amplifies shock. Prehistoric communities relied on social networks and environmental stability, though at smaller scales. When climate shifted and coastlines retreated, networks fractured, knowledge thinned, groups adapted, survived, reorganized. Today, stability is assumed more than questioned. Electricity flows when switches are pressed. Goods arrive when ordered. Information moves without pause. The reliability of these systems becomes background noise. It fades into expectation. This reflection is not prophecy. It does not predict imminent collapse or inevitable disruption. It recognizes pattern. Complex systems, whether ancient or modern, rest upon balance. They depend upon predictability of climate, of resource flow, of communication. When that predictability narrows, systems must adjust. The difference now is scale. Where ancient fragmentation may have isolated communities regionally, modern disruption can cascade globally within hours. The same connectivity that strengthens resilience through shared knowledge also connects vulnerability across borders. This does not imply fragility equals failure. Modern civilization possesses tools previous eras lacked: rapid communication, diversified food sources, scientific modeling. Awareness itself provides protection. Yet, the structural similarity remains. If civilization once fragmented under environmental stress, without erasing humanity, could modern complexity face interruption in similar ways? Not extinction. Not finality. Interruption. Temporary narrowing. Reorganization. Adaptation. The planet at night offers a final image. Lights shimmer across continents, outlining coastlines and river valleys. They form a luminous network visible from orbit, beautiful and intricate. Each point of light depends on others. Each glow rests upon systems rarely examined until they falter. The image is inspiring and dependent. If modern systems rest on fragile foundations, the next question becomes unavoidable. Are we noticing the signals of stress as carefully as we imagine, or are subtle warnings blending into the background, as they may have once done before? In the present, conversations about climate unfold across news screens, research journals, and dinner tables. Rising temperatures, extreme weather events, shifting coastlines, melting ice sheets. These topics are discussed with urgency in some circles and skepticism in others. Yet the deeper perspective stretches beyond politics or headlines. Earth has changed rapidly before. Ice cores and sediment layers confirm that transitions can unfold faster than once believed possible. During the Younger Dryas, temperatures in certain regions shifted dramatically within the span of decades, not over millennia, not gradually across ages, but within human lifetimes. That fact alone does not predict imminent catastrophe today. However, it reminds us that stability has never been permanent. The planet operates through complex feedback systems that can tip under certain pressures. Modern climate change is studied intensively. Data is gathered through satellites, ocean buoys, atmospheric sensors. Researchers debate projections, refine models, and test assumptions. The process is rigorous and ongoing. Complexity resists simplicity. The more subtle concern lies not in scientific disagreement, but in human psychology. People normalize gradual change. When shorelines retreat inches at a time, it feels manageable. When summers grow slightly warmer year by year, the shift can be absorbed into routine. Adaptation becomes habitual. Infrastructure adjusts. Crops shift northward. Air conditioning expands. We calibrate slowly, as the environment does. Yet thresholds are not always obvious. A glacier can thin incrementally, for decades before reaching a point where structural failure accelerates retreat. An ecosystem can absorb species loss until the disappearance of one key organism triggers disproportionate ripple effects. Ocean currents can adjust to freshwater input until a tipping balance is crossed. Would we recognize a turning point? Before it turns, ancient populations may not have seen early warning patterns clearly. Seasonal variation was expected. Droughts came and went. Floods rose and receded. Adaptation persisted as long as patterns returned, within familiar bounds. But when environmental shifts accelerated, when coastlines moved faster than relocation strategies could compensate, adaptation might have lagged behind change. The lesson is not alarm. It is awareness. Civilizations rarely collapse overnight. They compress gradually. Trade networks thin. Resource buffers shrink. Infrastructure strains. Communities reorganize to absorb stress. Adjustment can continue for long periods without apparent crisis, until one shift exceeds the buffer. The present moment is defined by debate, precisely because data suggests acceleration in certain trends: melting ice, rising seas, intensified storms. Interpretation of that acceleration varies. Yet the existence of measurable change is not in dispute. History does not insist that catastrophe follows. It illustrates that rapid transition is possible. The difference between manageable adaptation and disruptive instability often lies in timing. How quickly does the environment shift relative to society's capacity to adjust? How resilient are systems under sustained strain? Ancient resets, if they occurred, may have unfolded through compounding factors: cooling followed by warming, flooding layered upon ecological stress. No single event erased civilization. It was the accumulation that mattered. Today's debates reflect similar complexity. No single heatwave defines the future. No single storm dictates collapse. Patterns unfold across decades. The question is not whether history will repeat itself identically. It is whether we understand how quickly stability can thin when pressures align. Civilizations adjust, compress, and reorganize in response to stress. That capacity remains our strength, but awareness matters. If interruption remains possible in any era, humanity's greatest defense may not be infrastructure alone. It may be memory. There is one difference between the ancient world and ours that cannot be ignored. Memory no longer depends solely on breath. For most of human history, knowledge survived only as long as someone remembered it. Stories carried astronomy. Ritual encoded calendars. Skill passed hand to hand. When communities fractured, archives thinned with them. Today, memory multiplies. Data is stored in servers buried in mountains, mirrored across continents, transmitted through cables that cross entire oceans. Libraries still stand in stone buildings, but they are accompanied by distributed digital repositories holding the collected research, art, and language of civilization. Climate models are recorded in layered simulations. Geological histories are reconstructed with precision unimaginable centuries ago. Information travels instantly. Unlike prehistory, knowledge does not reside only within liveworks of people. It exists in hard drives, cloud infrastructure, quantum experiments, still in progress. Satellites orbit overhead, tracking atmospheric shifts, mapping ice retreat, detecting solar activity. Instruments monitor asteroids long before they approach. Early warning systems scan oceans for tremors. If the last reset erased memory, what protects ours? The answer seems reassuring at first glance. Redundancy, replication, preservation, yet even digital memory rests upon physical systems. Servers require electricity. Electricity depends on grids, woven through landscapes vulnerable to weather and resource constraints. Undersea cables carry signals across tectonic boundaries. Data centers rely on stable cooling and water supply. Dependency layers upon dependency. This observation is not prediction, it is awareness. Modern civilization is not blind to its vulnerability. Unlike our ancestors, we model climate patterns decades in advance. We monitor the sun's activity. We track space debris, geological science maps, fault lines and volcanic zones. Entire industries exist to identify risk before it materializes. Perhaps awareness itself is the difference between reset and adaptation. Ancient populations may have felt change without understanding its scale. Seasons shifted, rivers swelled, ice advanced and retreated. They adapted as long as adaptation was possible. We possess instruments that convert subtle signals into data long before the naked eye can perceive transformation. We debate projections because we can measure trajectories. Memory is no longer fragile in the same way. Yet, it is not invincible. The modern archive vault buried deep in Arctic ice offers a powerful image. Within reinforced chambers, copies of human knowledge are stored in environments chosen for stability and cold. Seeds are preserved. Cultural records archived. It is a deliberate act of foresight, a recognition that preservation requires planning. This vault does not assume catastrophe. It acknowledges uncertainty. The quiet hope embedded within such efforts is profound, that memory can outlast disruption. Humanity understands fragility more clearly now than at any previous point. Our vulnerability is mapped. Our resilience is studied. Our risks are debated openly. The contrast with deep prehistory is striking. Where earlier generations may have rebuilt from scattered fragments, carried only in story, we attempt to secure continuity through design. The question remains suspended, neither urgent nor dismissive. Will memory protect us this time? The answer does not depend solely on storage. It depends on coordination, foresight, and collective will. As we move beyond science and survival, another layer of inquiry waits, one less technical and more philosophical. Why does the idea of cyclical catastrophe feel both ancient and strangely familiar? Long before geological charts and climate models, people spoke of time as something that turned. In ancient Greece, poets described successive ages of humanity: gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each declining from the harmony of the last. In parts of Mesoamerica, cosmologies told of suns rising and falling, worlds created and destroyed before the current one emerged. Hindu traditions mapped vast yugas, cycles stretching across incomprehensible spans, each concluding in transformation before renewal began. These accounts vary in language and imagery. Some speak of fire descending from the sky. Others tell of waters covering the earth. Still others describe cosmic conflict reshaping the world. Yet beneath the surface differences, a shared structure appears. Time does not move in a straight line. It turns. Why did so many ancient civilizations expect the world to begin again? Modern culture largely embraces linear progress. We think in timelines and charts that move forward. We associate knowledge with accumulation, development with ascent. Even when we acknowledge setbacks, we tend to view them as temporary interruptions within a broader upward trajectory. Ancient cosmologies often resisted this simplicity. They assumed that prosperity would end, that order would give way to chaos, that renewal would follow destruction. The distinction is not trivial. Cyclical models frame instability as normal rather than exceptional. They embed transformation into the structure of reality itself. Fire and flood are not anomalies. They are chapters within recurring patterns. The documentary does not suggest that myths are literal records of singular global catastrophes. Myth operates on multiple levels: moral, symbolic, cosmological. It encodes values and fears as much as it preserves memory. Yet it is worth asking why cyclical thinking emerged so widely across cultures separated by oceans and centuries. Environmental rhythms shape perception. Seasons turn predictably. Day follows night. Tides rise and fall. Even longer oscillations, drought cycles, flood intervals, volcanic activity. introduce repetition into lived experience. Communities observing these patterns across generations might intuitively frame time as something circular. When stability fluctuates enough, linear expectations soften. If your landscape transforms within your lifetime, if your elders speak of land once dry, that is now submerged, if stars shift position across decades, the idea that the world renews itself in phases feels less abstract. Perhaps myths encode memory, or perhaps they encode observation of recurring change. Either way, the repetition across civilizations is striking. Greek philosophers debated cycles of destruction long before modern geology explained glaciation. Mesoamerican calendars tracked repeating solar patterns with intricate precision. South Asian cosmology mapped vast spans of time beyond written record. These traditions differ profoundly in detail, yet they converge on the idea that permanence is an illusion. Ancient cultures may have assumed instability as natural. Modern culture often assumes permanence, unless proven otherwise. This shift in perspective matters. When instability is expected, preparation becomes ritualized. When stability is presumed, disruption feels anomalous. The philosophical tension between cyclical and linear models of time echoes the larger inquiry of this documentary. If deep history contained episodes of disruption and renewal, cyclical frameworks may have offered intuitive alignment with lived experience. Conversely, if modern civilization has enjoyed relative stability for a limited span, linear thinking may feel justified within that narrow window. The question is not which model is correct in absolute terms. It is why cyclical visions of fire and water once felt so widespread, and why we have grown less comfortable with them. If ancient cultures expected cycles, the next inquiry emerges gently. Do we resist that expectation today, even when evidence suggests that change has never been entirely linear? There is a quiet reassurance in straight lines. Linear progress offers stability not only in textbooks, but in imagination. It suggests momentum that does not reverse for long. It promises improvement layered upon improvement, each generation inheriting more knowledge and more control than the last. In this framework, setbacks are temporary obstacles, not structural features of existence. Cyclical collapse unsettles that comfort. It introduces the possibility that advancement can compress, that gains can narrow, that the story does not move steadily upward, but curves back upon itself in unfamiliar ways. Industrial modernity reinforced the linear narrative with visible proof. Scientific revolutions transformed medicine and industry. Electricity illuminated cities. Engines shortened distances. Communication collapsed time zones. Life expectancy rose. Technologies accelerated at a pace unimaginable centuries before. These achievements are tangible. They shape daily life. It becomes easy to conclude that humanity has outgrown vulnerability, that we have stepped beyond the fragile rhythms that governed ancient worlds. But does progress eliminate cycles? Or merely disguise them? Technological advancement can reduce certain risks while amplifying others. Medical knowledge prevents diseases that once ravaged populations. Yet, dense urbanization can spread new ones rapidly. Engineering protects cities from moderate storms. Yet larger infrastructure demands greater stability in return. The question is not whether modern civilization is stronger than earlier forms. It clearly is in many measurable ways. The question is whether strength removes cyclicality or simply alters its expression. Ancient resets, if they occurred, may have reduced populations and fragmented knowledge. The scale was smaller, the networks less global. A modern disruption, environmental, cosmic, or systemic, would operate differently. Interconnection magnifies both resilience and vulnerability. The possibility need not evoke alarm to warrant reflection. Industrial society thrives because it manages complexity exceptionally well. It predicts, models, and prepares with unprecedented sophistication. At the same time, its very complexity depends on continuity across vast systems: energy, climate stability, transportation, digital infrastructure. Cyclical risk does not vanish when technology advances. It shifts form. Ancient communities might have measured vulnerability through harvest failure or river flooding. Today, we monitor atmospheric chemistry and orbital debris. The scale differs, but the principle persists. Stability is negotiated, not permanent. This is not a forecast of collapse. It is an invitation to reconsider assumptions. If the comfort of permanence rests on recent experience rather than universal history, then humility becomes rational. Recognition of provisional stability does not weaken civilization. It strengthens its capacity to prepare. Perhaps the deeper insight is this: linear progress and cyclical vulnerability can coexist. Humanity can advance technologically while remaining embedded within planetary systems subject to fluctuation. The reset hypothesis, whether ultimately validated or not, serves as a lens for examining that coexistence. It challenges the idea that progress immunizes society against disruption. It asks instead whether we acknowledge the fragility beneath complexity. The central question may not be whether a reset occurred in deep prehistory. It may be whether humanity understands that stability has always been provisional. If permanence is partly psychological comfort, then confronting cyclical possibility becomes less about fear and more about identity. What does it mean to be a species that rises, adapts, rebuilds, aware that stability has never been absolute? The final reflection of this chapter turns inward toward that question. Imagine the noise fading. The water recedes. The fires burn low. The cold relents. What remains after upheaval is not the drama of the event, but its aftermath. Altered landscapes, scattered communities. Silence where familiarity once stood. After catastrophe, real or hypothetical. What survives? Stone can endure. Monuments anchored in bedrock may resist erosion long after the people who shaped them are gone. Pillars stand where rivers once flowed differently. Alignments remain fixed against shifting skies. Genes persist, though compressed. Population bottlenecks narrow diversity, yet survival carries forward living memory in biological form. Humanity passes through contraction, then expands again. Myths endure in fragments. Stories shift shape, yet retain emotional cause. The memory of overwhelming water becomes ritual. The recollection of lost ages becomes philosophy. Narrative survives because it is carried, not stored. But beneath stone, blood, and story lies something less tangible and more constant. The impulse to rebuild, across time and geography. Communities reorganize after disruption. Floods reshape valleys. Villages rise anew on higher ground. Climate alters harvest patterns. Farming methods adjust. Empires collapse. Smaller networks form. Wars end. Borders redraw. Plague thins cities. Survivors reshape society. Resilience is not dramatic. It is deliberate. It does not always preserve detail. It often abandons complexity in favor of stability. It compresses knowledge into essentials and slowly expands outward again. What may appear as beginning is sometimes restoration. Perhaps the most remarkable fact is not that Earth may have reset civilization, but that civilization returned. If instability marked the end of the Ice Age, if coastlines shifted and ecosystems fractured, humanity did not vanish into silence. It adapted. It gathered inland. It raised stone circles. It cultivated soil. It developed writing. It rebuilt networks of trade and meaning. Survival does not guarantee that every detail remains intact. Languages disappear. Skills fade, landscapes change beyond recognition. Yet potential persists within those who endure. When the world narrows, potential concentrates. Over time, concentration becomes expansion. This perspective reframes the reset concept. It becomes less about loss and more about continuity through transformation. Interruptions do not erase the human story. They alter its course. The line bends, compresses, and then stretches forward again. If cycles exist, adaptation is our inheritance. This is not fatalism. It does not accept inevitable collapse as destiny. It recognizes pattern. Stability fluctuates, systems shift. Yet, across those shifts, humanity reorganizes with quiet persistence. If the world began again, would we remember who we were? Perhaps not fully. Perhaps memory would fragment as it once may have, but identity, shaped by resilience, would re-emerge in new forms. The silence after upheaval is not empty. It holds possibility. Stone stands against sky. Genes carry variation forward. Stories linger around fires. Communities gather once more. If a reset once occurred, humanity survived. And survival, though imperfect in its memory, always contains the seeds of renewal. From this stillness, the inquiry broadens again. Geological, genetic, cultural, philosophical threads intertwine. Chapter 9 will gather those strands, not to declare certainty, but to weigh convergence with care, bringing the pieces together into a measured evaluation of whether interruption shaped us more deeply than we have allowed ourselves to imagine. The images return in quiet succession. An ice core extracted from deep beneath a frozen surface, its pale layers holding compressed years like thin pages. A submerged coastline revealed by sonar mapping. River channels traced beneath dark water. Ancient stone circles standing against open sky, aligned to celestial turning points. Lines of DNA, rendered in luminous sequence. A whispered flood myth carried in a language no longer spoken. Each thread has been examined alone. Rapid climate shifts near the end of the Ice Age are well documented. The Younger Dryas introduced abrupt cooling after warming had begun, followed by renewed temperature rise. Sea levels climbed more than 100 meters over millennia, reshaping coastlines and submerging vast continental shelves. Genetic studies reveal population bottlenecks in human history, moments when diversity compressed before expanding again. Megafaunal species vanished within comparatively narrow windows of time. Monumental structures appeared inland, often after environmental turbulence. Flood narratives echo across cultures separated by oceans. None of these elements individually require a global civilizational reset. Climate fluctuates naturally. Seas rise and fall over geological scales. Species go extinct for multiple reasons. Populations contract and recover. Monumental construction may reflect independent social evolution. Myths can arise from localized disasters or symbolic traditions. Yet when these strands are placed side by side, a pattern emerges, not clean, not conclusive, but clustered. They converge around the same window of deep time. History rarely leaves behind tidy evidence of disruption. It does not label layers with certainty. Instead, it offers overlapping signals. Chemical traces in sediment align with temperature shifts. Genetic models point to contraction during ecological stress. Archaeological patterns reveal gaps and reorganization. Cultural memory preserves floods and lost ages. No single thread confirms a reset, but together they outline a horizon. When separate clues point to the same horizon, do we ignore them or follow the line? Caution remains essential. Convergence does not equal confirmation. Patterns can appear coherent even when phenomena are independent. The human mind excels at connecting dots, sometimes too readily. Yet intellectual integrity requires acknowledging when multiple disciplines brush against similar questions. Rapid climate instability. Rising seas, drowning habitable land. Population compression. Ecological collapse. Symbolic narratives of flood and renewal. Monumental rebuilding inland. Called these represent independent developments unfolding within the same period. Yes, climate change can drive extinction without reorganizing civilization globally. Sea level rise can displace coastal communities without erasing complex networks everywhere. Genetic bottlenecks may reflect migration patterns rather than catastrophe. But could these strands also represent a massive ecological and civilizational interruption? One not total enough to erase humanity, but significant enough to fracture continuity. The reset hypothesis, at this stage, stands not as established fact, but as structured possibility. It invites interdisciplinary dialogue rather than demands immediate revision. It does not claim lost empires beneath every ocean, nor secret suppression of knowledge. It suggests alignment. The pattern is subtle. It resists dramatic framing. It rests in clustering rather than crater. Open-mindedness does not require belief. It requires willingness to examine intersections without discarding them prematurely. The horizon remains distant. Evidence is incomplete. Marine archaeology is young. Genetic modeling continues to refine. Climate science deepens its precision, suspended between skepticism and intrigue. The inquiry narrows. If convergence raises the possibility of interruption, then honesty demands the next step. What are the strongest objections to this theory? And do they weaken it or refine it? Any serious inquiry must pause here. Patterns can be persuasive. Convergence can feel compelling. But history demands restraint. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. and the burden rests with those proposing revision. Many flood myths are understood as symbolic expressions. Water cleanses, renews, destroys, and transforms within human imagination. Independent riverine civilizations experienced devastating local floods regularly. It is not difficult to see how such experiences could shape narrative memory without referencing a single global trauma. Megafaunal extinction often aligns with human migration into new territories. As modern humans spread, hunting pressure increased, combined with climate stress. This expansion may have tipped fragile species toward disappearance. No comet fragments or planetary resets are required to explain such outcomes. Monumental construction, too, can arise through local innovation. Hunter-gatherer societies are not simple. They possess intricate social structures and symbolic systems. Cooperative labor does not require inheritance from lost civilizations. It requires organization, motivation, and shared meaning. Marine archaeology remains in early stages, yet the absence of extensive underwater cities does not automatically imply their concealment. It may simply indicate they were never there in grand architectural form. The strongest version of any theory must survive direct confrontation with these objections. What survives closer inspection, exaggeration, or a quieter possibility? Intellectual integrity requires narrowing the claim. The reset hypothesis need not imagine skyscrapers beneath the sea or advanced technologies erased from the record. That version collapses under lack of evidence. No credible data currently supports a globally industrial civilization, predating the Ice Age. But a reset defined differently, an ecological destabilization that fragmented interconnected human systems, remains more subtle and therefore more plausible. Civilization does not require steel or electricity to be disrupted. It requires networks, shared knowledge, stable trade routes, predictable environments. If those networks fractured due to rapid climate change, rising seas and ecological stress, the effects could resemble interruption rather than annihilation. Fragmentation leaves lighter traces than destruction. It reduces scale rather than eliminating presence. The archaeological record contains gaps. It reveals reorganization. It shows inland monumental construction emerging after environmental instability. These observations do not prove a global reset. They allow the possibility of civilizational contraction, followed by reconstruction. Absence of evidence is not evidence of hidden empires, nor is it definitive proof of uninterrupted continuity. This balanced position avoids sensationalism while preserving inquiry. It acknowledges that most extraordinary narratives dissolve under scrutiny. Yet it allows that quieter possibilities, less dramatic, more nuanced, can endure. Scientific history advances not through certainty declared prematurely, but through models tested repeatedly. The reset hypothesis, reframed as fragmentation and reassembly, becomes testable. It invites marine excavation, refined climate modeling, interdisciplinary collaboration. It does not require belief, it requires investigation. By resisting overreach, the argument gains credibility. By welcoming critique, it clarifies scope. Curiosity remains intact. Certainty remains cautious. Having tested the theory against its strongest objections, one final horizon remains. What might future discovery reveal if we continue to look patiently, rigorously, beneath water, within genomes, across myth and stone? The ocean returns to the frame, but this time it does not feel silent. High-resolution sonar sweeps across continental shelves that were once dry land. Autonomous underwater vehicles descend methodically, tracing grids through darkness. Their sensors capture subtle ridges, ancient river channels, terraces shaped when sea level stood lower. Each pass refines a map that did not exist a generation ago. Technology has extended human sight into regions that were previously unreachable. Ice core drilling grows increasingly precise, extracting slender columns that preserve atmospheric chemistry from thousands of years ago. Climate models reconstruct temperature oscillations with growing confidence. Genetic sequencing now identifies patterns of migration and contraction in finer detail than ever before. Humanity stands at a threshold. Most prehistoric shorelines remain largely unexplored. The submerged plains that once connected continents have been surveyed only in fragments. Vast stretches of seabed still lie beyond systematic examination, obscured by sediment and scale. If the missing chapter lies beneath the sea, are we finally ready to read it? The answer unfolds slowly. Marine archaeology demands patience. Conditions are complex. Currents shift evidence. Dating underwater discoveries requires careful calibration. Even when promising anomalies appear, interpretation moves cautiously. Science advances through replication and refinement, not dramatic revelation. Confirmation or refutation of a prehistoric reset may take decades. Patterns must converge not in suggestion, but in clarity. Sediment layers must align with climate events. Artifacts must remain within undisturbed context. Genetic models must reconcile with environmental data. Perhaps deeper scrutiny will dissolve the hypothesis entirely. Future surveys may reveal only scattered traces of isolated communities, confirming continuity rather than interruption. Or perhaps drowned settlements will emerge, evidence not of lost high technology, but of organized coastal life, disrupted by rising seas. Such discoveries would not rewrite human genius, but they might recalibrate its timeline. The frontier beneath us does not promise spectacle. It promises data, and data requires humility. Scientific frontiers rarely erupt with certainty. They expand incrementally. Instruments improve. Maps clarify. Debates sharpen. What seemed mysterious becomes measurable. Patience defines serious inquiry. There is something fitting in the possibility that answers lie underwater. The sea conceals gently. It does not erase through violence alone. It covers layers, preserves in certain conditions. It waits. An underwater drone glides close to the seabed, its lights cutting narrow beams through suspended particles. In the filtered glow, what appears to be an ancient riverbank emerges, a contour shaped by flowing water long before the ocean rose above it. Sediment drifts in slow motion, undisturbed by urgency. History does not always shout. Sometimes it waits. Whether the reset hypothesis ultimately withstands scrutiny or yields to alternative explanations, the act of searching reshapes understanding. It expands awareness of how much remains unknown beneath familiar surfaces. And perhaps the deeper lesson is not about catastrophe, but about curiosity, about willingness to follow questions into uncomfortable spaces without forcing conclusions. The horizon remains open. From here, the inquiry shifts once more, away from evidence alone and toward meaning. What does it signify to consider interruption as part of our origin story? How does possibility reshape identity? Next chapter turns inward, reflecting on what survives not only in stone and genome, but in the story humanity chooses to tell about itself. Morning arrives quietly. Light spreads across a landscape where ancient stone rests in the foreground, weathered but upright. Beyond it, modern buildings rise in glass and steel, catching the first glow of sunrise. Between ruin and skyline lies open ground, grass moving in gentle wind, carrying no indication of the centuries layered beneath it. Stillness does not erase history. It holds it. Across deep time, interruption appears not as anomaly, but as pattern. Ice advances across continents, then withdraws. Forests expand, then give way to grasslands. Rivers carve new paths. Empires consolidate territory, then fracture into smaller states. Trade routes flourish, then thin. Languages bloom, then vanish. Seen from this vantage, human civilization may not resemble a ladder climbing steadily upward. What if civilization is not a ladder upward, but a rhythm through time? The possibility reframes everything explored. Whether a single global catastrophe reset civilization, or whether disruption unfolded through layered environmental shifts, the larger truth persists. Interruption recurs. Not as total annihilation, as recalibration. Glaciers reshaped continents without ending life. Climatic oscillations altered coastlines without erasing humanity. Population bottlenecks narrowed diversity, yet survival carried forward enough variation for expansion. Monumental architecture reappeared inland, suggesting reorganization after stress rather than absence of intelligence. The revelation may not be that a reset occurred. It may be that resilience defines humanity more than stability ever has. The binary between catastrophe and progress dissolves under closer examination. They are not opposing forces. They can coexist within cycles. Advancement continues, yet conditions shift. Innovation emerges partly in response to constraint. Architecture rises in answer to instability. Survival through disruption shaped our species long before recorded history. Adaptation to fluctuating climates, resource variability, and ecological transformation prepared communities for reorganization. Cultural memory compressed and expanded as networks fractured and reformed. This rhythm extends beyond prehistory. Recorded civilizations demonstrate similar arcs. Urban centers flourish, with complex governance and trade. External pressure or environmental strain triggers contraction. New systems emerge from remnants of the old. Knowledge is preserved, sometimes imperfectly, sometimes reinvented. The concept of reset, reconsidered carefully, does not signify erasure. It suggests testing. When systems encounter stress beyond certain thresholds, they narrow. What remains carries potential forward. From narrowed foundations, expansion resumes, often reshaped by experience of disruption. Modern civilization occupies its own position within this continuum. It builds upon prior resilience while adding unprecedented layers of interconnection and technological capacity. The challenges differ in scale, yet the underlying pattern, stability negotiated within shifting conditions, remains. To acknowledge this does not diminish achievement. It contextualizes it. Human progress has been real. Medical breakthroughs, scientific understanding, communication networks, all represent extraordinary capacity. But these achievements exist within planetary systems that continue to oscillate and evolve. Reset, if it occurred, did not end humanity. It tested it. Testing reveals strengths and weaknesses. It strips away illusion while preserving adaptability. It clarifies which structures endure and which require redesign. From the vantage point of dawn, ancient ruin and modern skyline appear not as opposites, but as chapters within a longer arc. Both testify to human capacity to build. Both stand upon ground shaped by forces larger than any single generation. If civilization is rhythm rather than ladder, interruption becomes part of its cadence. And if resilience defines us more deeply than stability, then awareness of that rhythm invites reflection rather than fear. The question now shifts from history to responsibility. If resilience defines us, then what do we do with this awareness in the present moment? The focus narrows. After tracing ice and stone myth and genome, the inquiry turns inward, toward the present generation that stands with unprecedented awareness. Modern humanity understands planetary systems with clarity unimaginable to our ancestors. We track atmospheric chemistry in real time. We map tectonic plates and monitor seismic tremors. We detect near-Earth objects long before they approach. We simulate climate futures across centuries with layered computational models. Knowledge surrounds us. If a reset occurred once through natural forces, that knowledge becomes both shield and burden. Earlier civilizations may not have known what was coming. A river swelling beyond precedent might have seemed random. Seasonal shifts could feel like fate. Coastal retreat would unfold slowly, perhaps without comprehension of its long trajectory. We often do. This difference is subtle, yet profound. Awareness does not guarantee control. It does, however, transform passivity into choice. If past civilizations forgot, what will we choose to carry forward? The question does not demand blame. It invites reflection. Technological capacity offers possibilities previous eras never possessed. Asteroid detection networks scan the sky. Early warning systems monitor tsunamis. International research collaborates across borders to predict ecological tipping points. Digital archives replicate knowledge redundantly across continents. Preparedness is no longer limited to ritual or memory alone. It can be engineered. Yet, engineering relies on will. Memory, in this context, becomes responsibility. To remember that stability has always been provisional is to plan accordingly. To understand that disruption has shaped our species is to recognize resilience as a trait requiring cultivation. Not assumption, stewardship enters quietly into the conversation, not as moral indictment, but as logical extension. If humanity occupies a position of greater capacity, then the preservation of continuity depends on choices that align awareness with action. This is not a call to alarm. It is an acknowledgement of context. Interruption may be part of Earth's long rhythm. Ice advances and retreats, climate oscillates, cosmic debris crosses planetary paths. Ecosystems reorganize. But within that rhythm, humanity now holds tools capable of mitigation. Preparedness becomes part of identity. Rather than viewing resilience as something proven only after crisis, it can become embedded within planning. Infrastructure can be reinforced. Environmental stress can be reduced. Communication networks can diversify. Knowledge can be preserved in multiple forms. Memory transforms from passive recollection into active guidance. History is not only what happened, it is what we choose to remember. If ancient fragmentation narrowed networks and compressed knowledge, then modern continuity depends on conscious preservation. Digital archives alone cannot protect civilization. They require stable systems and shared intention. Responsibility does not imply inevitability of collapse. It reflects awareness that resilience is sustained deliberately. Standing within modern complexity, humanity occupies a unique threshold. We can study our own vulnerability with scientific precision. We can debate it publicly. We can design responses. Memory offers orientation. Whether or not a prehistoric reset fractured early networks, the pattern of interruption and adaptation remains visible across time. The question is how awareness reshapes our participation within that pattern. As the inquiry draws towards stillness once more, the focus shifts from responsibility outward to reflection. The final section returns to silence, where the question that began this journey waits unanswered, yet no longer unexamined. The ocean returns to stillness. Waves move with patient rhythm, touching shorelines that appear permanent beneath morning light. From a distance, nothing suggests drowned valleys or submerged plains. No marker rises from the surface to indicate where rivers once carved paths through exposed earth. The sky arches above, quiet and undisturbed, offering no sign of ancient fire. Yet the silence now feels different. It carries context. The reset hypothesis remains unproven. No single discovery has confirmed a global civilizational interruption at the end of the Ice Age. Marine archaeology is incomplete. Genetic models evolve. Climate reconstructions refine with new data. Monumental architecture continues to be studied within existing frameworks. Certainty has not been claimed. And yet the possibility lingers. Earth has changed suddenly before. Ice advanced across continents and retreated within human memory. Temperatures shifted abruptly. Coastlines moved miles inland as sea levels rose. Megafaunal giants vanished. Human populations narrowed, then expanded. Monumental structures appeared inland after periods of instability. These are facts, though their connections remain debated. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether catastrophe occurred. It is how humanity endured, without preserving the full memory. The ocean's surface offers no visible map of submerged lands. The seabed below holds contours, shaped when the waterline stood far lower. Yet those shapes remain hidden beneath layers of sediment and salt. The sky reveals no trace of distant impacts, even if fragments once crossed it. Stone pillars stand on dry ground, but the stories that motivated their construction are incomplete. Evidence exists, fragmented, subtle, incomplete. History does not always announce its ruptures with clarity. It leaves impressions in climate records, genetic signatures, ecological shifts. It scatters clues across disciplines, requiring patience to assemble, and sometimes, even when assembled, interpretation remains open. If the Earth reset once, would we ever fully know? The answer may rest somewhere between affirmation and uncertainty. Some traces may remain forever ambiguous. Some chapters may never be reconstructed in full detail. The absence of definitive proof does not eliminate possibility, nor does possibility equal confirmation. The value of this journey may lie not in final answers, but in expanded perspective. The silence that began this documentary returns, yet it is no longer empty. It holds awareness of fragility and resilience intertwined. It holds recognition that stability has never been absolute. It holds curiosity about submerged landscapes and compressed memory. The ocean breathes steadily. The sky remains vast. Modern cities glow in the distance, layered above ancient ground. History may not be finished revealing itself. New instruments will map deeper. Future excavations may clarify timelines. Genetic research will refine models. Or perhaps the reset hypothesis will gradually dissolve, replaced by more precise explanations of how disruption and continuity interwove. Either outcome enriches understanding. The question remains suspended, not as threat, but as invitation. In the quiet between waves and wind, curiosity persists. It urges examination without haste, skepticism without dismissal, imagination without exaggeration. The silence before the answer still remains, and that silence is where wonder lives.